It started as an idle curiosity on a rainy Tuesday. I was sprawled on my lumpy couch, the glow of the television illuminating my tiny living room, scrolling through videos on my phone. A title caught my eye: Missing 411, Strange and Unexplained Disappearances in America's National Parks. I clicked without much thought, expecting an entertaining distraction. What I found instead was a puzzle that refused to leave me alone. I was captivated by stories of people vanishing without a trace, of search and rescue teams baffled by trails that led nowhere, and of eerie coincidences that defied explanation. My curiosity soon morphed into an obsession. I devoured every piece of information I could find: books, forums, interviews, documentaries. Within 3 weeks, I knew the case files better than the average park ranger. Yet the more I learned, the more questions I had. Why did some victims reappear miles from where they vanished, their bodies inexplicably mangled? Why were dogs unable to follow scents? And why did the National Park Service seem so intent on avoiding these questions? Theories ranged from the plausible to the absurd: animal attacks, rogue survivalists, cryptids, and even alien abductions. One theory, however, resonated with me more than any other. It was the idea that ancient giant eagles were preying on humans in the wilderness, their existence covered up by authorities to avoid mass panic. At first it sounded ludicrous, but the more I thought about it, the more pieces began to fit. The theory was as bizarre as it was compelling. These weren't ordinary eagles, they were colossal, prehistoric predators, remnants of a forgotten age. Their hunting patterns explained the baffling disappearances. They would swoop down silently, snatch their prey, and carry it off to inaccessible nests hidden high in the mountains. This theory accounted for the missing bodies, the lack of trails, and even the inexplicable injuries on the remains that were found. Witness accounts of large shadows or unearthly shrieks suddenly made sense. What really clinched it for me, though, was the involvement of the military. I read about Green Berets being deployed to assist in search and rescue operations, a detail that stood out because the military doesn't usually get involved in civilian matters unless something truly extraordinary is afoot. Could these units be sent to deal with giant eagles, tasked with managing their population to prevent exposure? The idea burrowed into my brain and refused to leave. If these creatures existed, they represented a biological marvel, a secret worth keeping from the public for both scientific and economic reasons. After all, who would visit national parks if they knew they might end up as bird food? But the theory wasn't just a curiosity for me anymore. It became a challenge, a riddle I needed to solve. And so, against all common sense, I decided to find out for myself. Planning the trip took months. If these creatures existed, they would be found in remote areas far from human activity. I chose Mount Rainier National Park as my hunting ground, not only because of its infamous history of disappearances, but also because of its dense, rugged terrain. I wasn't going in blind, though. I spent weeks studying eagles, their hunting habits, their preferred habitats, and their behavior. I learned that eagles are ambush predators, masters of stealth who wait patiently for the perfect moment to strike. If a giant eagle existed, it would likely inhabit high cliff faces or dense canopies, places where it could observe without being seen. Armed with this knowledge, I packed my gear: a sturdy blind for concealment, a high-powered camera, plenty of food, and most importantly, a GPS beacon that I could activate in case of an emergency. My friends thought I was crazy when I told them about my plan, and perhaps they were right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was onto something. I wasn't chasing a myth, I was chasing the truth. As I drove into the park at dawn, the towering silhouette of Mount Rainier loomed against the sky, its snow-capped peak glowing in the early light. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that bites at your nose and ears. I parked my car at a remote trailhead, hoisted my pack onto my shoulders, and began the long hike into the wilderness. Setting up the blind took longer than expected. I found a spot near a steep cliff face that overlooked a wide clearing, a perfect vantage point for observing wildlife. The first day passed uneventfully. I watched as deer grazed lazily in the clearing, their ears flicking at the occasional sound of the wind rustling through the trees. By nightfall, I was both bored and restless. The silence of the wilderness was oppressive, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant howl of a coyote. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the wind whistle through the trees, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. The second day was much the same, and by the third, I was beginning to lose hope. My food supplies were running low, and I hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary. Then, on the morning of the fourth day, everything changed. It started with a stillness, The forest, usually alive with the chatter of birds and the rustle of leaves, fell eerily silent. Even the deer grazing in the clearing seemed to sense it, their heads snapping up in unison, ears twitching. I felt it too, a weight in the air, an electric charge that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow passed overhead, massive and swift. I barely had time to react before it descended. It happened so fast that my mind struggled to keep up. One moment, the clearing was empty. The next, it was dominated by the largest bird I had ever seen. Its wingspan must have been at least 40 feet. Its feathers a dark, iridescent black that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. Its talons, each as long as a dagger, sank into the back of a deer, pinning it to the ground. The poor creature let out a pitiful bleat before the eagle's beak tore into its neck with horrifying precision. Blood sprayed across the clearing, painting the grass a vivid red. I froze, paralyzed by a mix of awe and terror. The bird was magnificent, a creature out of time, yet there was nothing majestic about the way it killed. It was a predator, pure and simple, driven by primal instincts. Slowly, I reached for my camera, careful not to make any sudden movements. My hands trembled as I adjusted the lens and snapped a photo. The click of the shutter was deafening in the stillness, and the eagle's head snapped toward me with terrifying speed. Its eyes locked onto mine, golden, unblinking, and filled with a predatory intelligence. In that moment, I knew I had made a mistake. The eagle's reaction was immediate and violent. It let out an ear-splitting screech, the sound so loud it seemed to shake the trees around me. Its wings unfurled, blocking out the sun as it rose into the air with terrifying grace, the deer carcass dangling from its talons like a broken puppet. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my body was frozen in place, every muscle locked in fear. The bird hovered for a moment, scanning the area with its piercing gaze, and then it released the deer. The carcass hit the ground with a sickening thud, and the eagle turned its full attention to me. Adrenaline surged through my veins, breaking the paralysis, and I scrambled out of the blind. The makeshift structure offered no real protection, and I knew I had to move fast. I bolted downhill, weaving between trees and hoping against hope that the dense forest canopy would slow the eagle down. Behind me, I heard the heavy beat of its wings as it took off in pursuit. Each powerful flap was like a distant drumbeat, growing louder and closer with every passing second. The forest floor was uneven, littered with roots and rocks that threatened to trip me with every step. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder than I ever had before, but the eagle was gaining on me. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately regretted it. The massive bird was barely 20 feet away, its talons outstretched and ready to strike. I ducked just in time as it swooped past, its claws raking the air where my head had been moments before. I stumbled into a clearing, my breath ragged and my legs trembling. The eagle circled overhead, its shadow passing over me like a dark omen. I had no plan, no idea how to escape this nightmare. My camera was still slung around my neck, its weight a constant reminder of the evidence I had risked everything to obtain. But none of that would matter if I didn't survive. Desperation drove me to act. I spotted a fallen tree nearby, its trunk thick and sturdy, and dove behind it just as the eagle swooped down again. The bird's talons scraped against the wood with a sound like nails on a chalkboard, and I felt splinters spray across my face. It screeched in frustration and ascended once more, preparing for another attack. My mind raced. I needed a weapon, something to defend myself with. My hands scrabbled through the dirt and leaves until they closed around a sharp rock. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As the eagle dove again, I waited until the last possible second before rolling to the side and swinging the rock upward with all my strength. The makeshift weapon glanced off the bird's talons and it veered off course, slamming into a tree with a deafening crash. For a moment, I thought I had won. The eagle lay motionless, its massive wings splayed out across the ground. But as I crept closer, clutching the rock like a lifeline, its eyes snapped open. With a furious screech, it launched itself back into the air, and I knew my fight was far from over. I ran blindly, the forest a blur of green and brown as I sprinted deeper into its depths. The eagle's cries echoed through the trees, a relentless reminder that it was still hunting me. My body screamed for rest, but I couldn't afford to stop. Every second I hesitated could be my last. As I pushed forward, the terrain grew more treacherous. The trees became denser, their gnarled roots reaching out like claws to snag my feet. The air grew colder, and the light filtering through the canopy took on an eerie, muted quality. It felt as though I was entering another world, one where the rules of nature no longer applied. Then I saw it, a massive cliff face rising out of the forest like a fortress wall. At its base was a dark crevice just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. It wasn't much, but it was the only shelter I could see. I sprinted toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. The eagle's shadow passed over me again, its cries growing louder as it closed in for another attack. I dove into the crevice, the jagged rocks scraping against my arms and legs. The space was narrow and claustrophobic, but it offered a temporary reprieve from the relentless predator. I pressed myself against the cold stone, trying to quiet my breathing as the eagle landed outside. Its talons scraped against the ground as it stalked back and forth, searching for a way to reach me. The crevice extended deeper into the cliff than I had expected. As the eagle continued its futile search outside, I inched further into the darkness, my hands feeling along the rough walls for guidance. The air grew stale, and the faint scent of decay made my stomach churn. But I couldn't turn back now, not with that monster waiting for me. After what felt like an eternity, the narrow passage opened up into a cavern. My flashlight illuminated the space, revealing a horrifying sight. The floor was littered with bones, deer, elk, and disturbingly human. Some were picked clean, while others still bore scraps of flesh and clothing. A sense of dread settled over me as I realized where I was. The eagle's nest. In the center of the cavern, a massive pile of sticks and debris formed a crude nest. Feathers the size of my forearm were scattered across the floor, their iridescent sheen catching the light. Among the remains, I spotted a tattered backpack and a cracked phone screen. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. These were the belongings of other hikers, other victims who had wandered too far into the eagle's territory. A low growl echoed through the cavern, and I whipped around, my flashlight trembling in my hand. At the entrance, the eagle stood silhouetted against the fading daylight, its eyes glowing like molten gold. It had found me. There was no escape, no way out. The eagle blocked the only exit, its massive form filling the narrow passage. My heart raced as I scanned the cavern for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes landed on a broken hiking pole among the debris. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The eagle lunged, its talons slashing through the air with deadly precision. I rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the attack, and grabbed the hiking pole. The bird screeched in frustration, its wings flapping violently as it tried to maneuver in the confined space. I swung the pole with all my strength, striking its beak with a sharp crack. The bird recoiled, momentarily stunned, and I seized the opportunity to strike again. This time I aimed for its eyes, hoping to blind it. The pole connected, and the eagle let out a blood-curdling scream, its head thrashing wildly. But even wounded, it was far from defeated. The fight was brutal and chaotic, a desperate struggle between man and beast. Blood, both mine and the eagle's, spattered the cavern walls as we clashed again and again. Every time I thought I had gained the upper hand, the bird would counter with a ferocity that left me reeling. The cavern was a symphony of chaos. Feathers and dust filled the air as the eagle thrashed in its blind fury. Its screeches reverberated off the walls, a sound so guttural and primal that it felt as though the mountain itself was alive and raging against me. My breaths came in ragged gasps, and every muscle in my body screamed for relief, but I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I'd die. The hiking pole was splintered and useless now, its jagged remains clutched in my shaking hands. The eagle lunged again, its talons gouging deep furrows into the stone floor where I had been standing a moment before. I scrambled backward, my back colliding with the cavern wall. There was nowhere left to go. The realization sent a cold wave of dread washing over me. But then my eyes caught sight of something, a faint glimmer near the nest. It was my camera. Miraculously intact, it lay amidst the debris, its lens glinting faintly in the dim light. And beside it, half buried under a tangle of sticks, was a flare gun. My mind raced. The flare gun must have belonged to one of the hikers who had come before me, another unlucky soul who had wandered into this nightmare. It was my last chance. I lunged for it, the eagle's talons slicing through the air just inches from my back. My fingers closed around the cold metal and I spun around, raising the gun. The eagle reared back, its massive wings outstretched as it prepared for another strike. I pulled the trigger. The flare shot out with a deafening crack, the bright red light searing through the darkness. It struck the eagle square in the chest, and the cavern was instantly filled with the acrid stench of burning feathers. The bird let out a scream so piercing that it felt like knives driving into my skull. It stumbled backward, its massive form crashing into the nest and sending debris flying in every direction. I didn't wait to see if the flare had killed it. My instincts screamed at me to move, to run, to get out of that place before the eagle regained its footing. I sprinted toward the crevice, my hands clawing at the rough stone as I scrambled through the narrow passage. Behind me, the eagle thrashed wildly, its screams of pain echoing like a death knell. The cold night air hit me like a slap as I burst out of the crevice and into the forest. The adrenaline that had carried me this far was fading fast, replaced by an overwhelming exhaustion that threatened to collapse my legs beneath me. But I couldn't stop. Not yet. The forest was a maze of shadows and moonlight, every rustle of leaves and crack of branches sending my heart racing. I could still hear the eagle's cries in the distance, but they were growing fainter. Whether it was dead or simply too injured to give chase, I didn't know, and I wasn't about to stick around to find out. My only thought was to get back to the trail, to find some semblance of civilization. The path seemed endless, every step a battle against my own trembling limbs and the suffocating fear that still gripped me. But finally, after what felt like hours, I saw it. The faint outline of the parking lot through the trees. My car was still there, a beacon of safety amidst the madness. I staggered toward it, fumbling with my keys as my shaking hands struggled to unlock the door. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut and locking it with a trembling finger. For a moment, I just sat there, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, and every shadow on the road seemed to hide some lurking terror. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the eagle swooping down behind me, its golden eyes gleaming in the darkness. But the road remained empty, and the forest receded into the distance. When I finally reached my apartment, I stumbled inside and locked the door behind me. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just escaped. I sank onto the couch, my mind racing as I tried to process what had happened. The camera was still around my neck, its weight a constant reminder of the evidence I had captured. I reviewed the photos with trembling hands, half expecting the images to somehow disappear, or reveal nothing but blurry shadows. But there it was, the eagle, its massive form unmistakable against the backdrop of the forest. The sight sent a shiver down my spine, a visceral reminder of how close I had come to death. For days, I debated what to do with the photos. Part of me wanted to share them, to expose the truth about what was lurking in our national parks. But another part of me knew the risks. If the National Park Service really was covering this up, what lengths would they go to in order to keep it hidden? And even if I did release the photos, would anyone believe me? In the end, I decided to keep the photos hidden, at least for now. I couldn't shake the feeling that sharing them would only bring more danger, not just to me, but to anyone who went searching for the eagle after seeing the evidence. The creature was still out there somewhere, and I didn't want to be responsible for sending anyone else to their death, but the experience has haunted me ever since. Every time I hear about another disappearance in a national park, I wonder if the eagle was involved. I think about the hikers who vanish without a trace, the search parties that come up empty-handed, the families left with nothing but questions. And I wonder how long the truth can stay hidden. The National Park Service is guarding secrets far darker than anyone realizes. I've seen it with my own eyes, and I'll never forget what I witnessed. If you ever venture into the wilderness, be careful. Stick to the trails, stay with your group, and keep your eyes on the skies. You never know what might be watching from above. For now, I can only hope that my story serves as a warning. The wilderness is beautiful, but it's also dangerous, far more dangerous than most people realize. And sometimes, the greatest threats aren't the ones you can see, but the ones you never knew existed.